Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to talk about how you can turn great ideas into successful projects with an efficient project intake process. My name is Caroline Holitsky, and I'm the Director of Marketing at MeisterPlan USA. And I'm here with my colleague, Achim Gnan, and he is the Senior Customer Success Manager at MeisterPlan USA. MeisterPlan is a project portfolio management and capacity planning software. And we've recently added a new feature that we call the board feature. And what that is it's a Kanban style board that you can use for your project intake process. And we'll go into more detail about that later. To tell you a little more about myself, I've been with MeisterPlan for a bit over 5 years, and I'm currently located in our Houston, Texas office. And my experience comes primarily from financial services and oil and gas industries, but I enjoy talking to people of all industries, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you guys today. So, Achim, do you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yes, of course, thank you. So my name is Achim Gnan. I have joined MeisterPlan about 5 years ago as well. Caroline was actually one of my first colleagues I got to know. And in my previous life, I was working for an enterprise PMO. And after working for the MeisterPlan Business Development Department, I now lead our US-based customer success team and work with customers of all different sizes and industries on a daily basis. So I'm excited to share some of our insights today.
Awesome, thanks, Achim. So to everyone who has joined, if you have questions, we will have a question and answer session toward the end of the webinar. And so you can submit your questions in the questions panel. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to contact you after the webinar to answer your question. Okay, so let's get started. Most companies try really hard to hire great people and build excellent teams. And when you have a good team of people, it's only natural for them to come up with great project ideas. But how do you take those ideas and turn them into successful projects that have a good chance of delivering positive results? Well, that's where a project intake process comes in. So it can accomplish just that. It can help you ensure that you are working on the right things by evaluating new initiatives, comparing them to current work, and really just ensuring that you have the right prioritized projects in place, that they have the most chance of success, and that you can deliver the results that you want to deliver. So Achim, you work with our customers every day. What are some of the challenges that you've heard in terms of project intake?
Yeah, so the most commonly seen challenges are a lack of an intake process and a missing central location for initiatives. Ambiguous or missing processes never contribute to the success of an organization. But today, we are going to focus on the project intake process, where the lack of an established process is the root cause for a variety of challenges. Oftentimes, we see that an inadequate intake process is directly linked to a missing central location for initiatives and vice versa. So it's a two-way street. For example, when there are different standards across teams and stakeholders, it is likely that new project ideas also don't reside in the one location. For example, if Team A and Team B have different evaluation standards, it makes it difficult, if not impossible, to manage a successful project portfolio because they are speaking different languages. It is apples and oranges. So they're not working toward the same goal, basically. And to avoid silos and encourage collaboration, a project portfolio must share resources and dependencies with the relevant teams of the business in a central location. This approach best utilizes resources and more effectively delivers on goals, while also helping to maintain everyone's sanity. Now, let's talk about the challenges associated with ad hoc project initiation, without a focus on the pipeline or available capacity. Ad hoc project initiation is something we are all familiar with. Once again, ad hoc project initiation are often likely to fail due to a lack of process. Ignoring the overall demand and available capacity results in redundancies and over-allocated resources. This can impact one project or, more significantly, the entire portfolio. Another crucial challenge we see is comparing new initiatives to current projects, meaning that the impact to the portfolio when adding in new initiatives is not clear. So, not understanding the current health status of a project portfolio is dangerous. And unfortunately, we see that missing transparency and impact assessments are quite common, and not understanding the impact of a new project before launching it is something that most organizations struggle with. If there is no ability to determine the impact of new initiatives on the current portfolio and vice versa, it often results in a decision-making process which is based on a gut feeling. This can result in a doomed initiative or unfeasible portfolio. So the last common challenge I'd like to highlight is the misalignment to overall organizational strategy. In most organizations, the person who comes up with a project idea and assigns strategic objectives during the intake process is not necessarily the same person who defined the overall organizational strategy. However, for both small and large organizations, it is very important to consider the impact of the perceived value of the person who submits a project. If the organizational strategy is not clearly defined, communicated, and bought into, it will result rapidly in a misalignment of projects.
Great, thanks, Achim. So it sounds like a lot of the challenges stem from either a lack of process or a lack of transparency into the data. So in your experience, have you found that these challenges are consistent across different types of organizations?
I'd say yes and no. So there's enough evidence to say that there are organizations in certain industries that struggle more than others if they don't have a proper project intake process in place. This is especially true for service providers and consulting companies. If your organization confirms an external project without evaluating and ensuring its feasibility, then your organization and its reputation is immediately at risk if the project fails. On the other hand, if you kick off an internal project without proper evaluation, you may not receive an angry email from a client, but the long-term consequences are the same. They are traceable and cause harm to your business. Bottom line is, if there's an inadequate intake process and more projects are being introduced, the barrel will overflow at some point and you will be left with a mess. At Meisterplan, our specialty is supporting organizations overwhelmed by the overall complexity of their intake process due to the amount of new projects and the need for prioritization. Our goal is to help business leaders deliver the best results by improving the management of projects and capacity planning so they can successfully anticipate and adapt to changes to accelerate growth. Organizations without intake process or with clunky intake processes, they struggle aligning new projects to the overall organizational strategy and ad hoc initiation of projects. Last but not least, I would like to raise the importance of transparency. Lack of transparency in the project intake process is a universal challenge common across all types of organizations. And it often comes into play as you compare new initiatives to current projects. Fortunately, this is one of the great strengths of Meisterplan, as we will see later.
Great, thank you, Achim. So now that we understand the challenges that come and that organizations face in terms of project intake, do you find that all organizations typically approach project intake processes in the same way?
Having an actual intake process is vitally important to the success of organizations and is the one consistent and overriding approach to ensuring good portfolio management. However, the way an organization approaches its project intake activities should be a tailored one, one that fits the needs of the business. So you need a process that provides sufficient room for customization and the ability to adapt, and provides also the tools to support it. Now, there are a few guidelines for a successful intake process that are important across all types of organizations. First, everyone in the organization must know that a project intake process exists and buy in. Without buy-in, projects will continue to be less likely to succeed and less likely contribute to the overall organizational mission. Additionally, time and resources will be lost, and if a project doesn't meet the intake process criteria, it will ultimately be rejected by the process owner or responsible stakeholder. Second, a periodic review process is inevitable. the cadence must follow the needs of the business and the dynamics of the project portfolio. For example, how many new projects per period, impacts to the portfolio, changing external factors, internal fluctuation, and so on. Third, I'd like to touch base on process adaptability, especially since we've seen what a huge external shock the global pandemic was to all of us. Those organizations Meisterplan is working with and who had an established intake process in place before the pandemic hit, they actually showed that they were able to outperform the organizations that didn't. Why? Because they were able to adapt evaluation criteria and intake cadence on the fly without changing or disrupting the actual intake process. Here's an example. We saw organizations accelerating the periodic intake activities from a quarterly to a monthly cadence and adjusting their evaluation criteria based on the strategic shifts necessary due to COVID. This required some work and reprioritization of the portfolio, but once this was done, the intake process was still familiar and these organizations were able to respond to the changing environment a lot faster than others. Fourth, I want to highlight the need for prioritizing urgent projects. If a stakeholder doesn't know how to fast-track an initiative when necessary, then it's likely that they won't stick to the standard process and they will find a workaround. So in this case, it's important to have a clear and communicated fast-track procedure in place as part of the project intake process. Last, consistently comparing new and current projects is important to create a feasible scenario going forward, simply because we live in a world of continuously changing conditions.
Thanks, Achim. So my next question, you've touched on this a bit already when talking about the approaches that organizations take, but what other best practices do you recommend for a company who really wants to turn their ideas into successful projects to move their company forward?
Yeah, so looking back at all what I've reported to you, we've narrowed down a few important best practices, and yeah, let's go. First, involve the right people at the right time. It's smart to have an intake process and important to establish and communicate a transparent framework that outlines roles, responsibilities, and governance. However, really think through and make sure you have the right cooks in the kitchen at each step in the process. Too many cooks will result in a less streamlined process. Second, consider the needs of the business. For example, if there are a lot of ad hoc initiations happening, there's probably the need for a fast-track procedure. Every organization is different. Make sure the intake process fits the needs of your business and stakeholders understand that you are also listening to and addressing their needs. Third, clearly communicate priorities and strategies continuously. To achieve this, make sure that everyone who's involved has access to the current strategic objectives. It is important that everyone sees and acts on the same value and message. Publishing the process in the intranet, flowcharts are really helpful here, or even have a white paper available highlighting the current state of things. Here, I really recommend to make sure and label each document with a version. Fourth, define a process owner. Going back to make sure that you involve the right people at the right time, a process owner is critical to ongoing success. Typical roles are a PMO or a portfolio coordinator. It can also be the leader of a business unit. And last, decide on a tool to help manage the process. It is important to create an overall understanding on where you gather, review, and decide on new initiatives. This best practice will also improve your ability to compare new and current projects. So most of the challenges we highlighted today are caused by a lack of process and missing transparency when managing a project pipeline. However, this can be solved by defining a project intake process, supported with a tool that covers not just a part of a project lifecycle, like evaluation or execution, but rather from ideation to delivery. So we see that when the intake process is understood as an integral part of an organization's project portfolio management framework, these challenges vanish quickly. With that, I'll stop talking and segue us into the fun part, a quick demo of Meisterplan.
Great, thanks, Achim. I will switch over to our demo. Please let me know, Achim, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I can see
Okay.
your master plan system.
Perfect. Okay. Well, to lead us into the demo, as we've discussed, turning project ideas into successful projects starts with the project intake process. And that means it starts with collecting new initiatives. So in MeisterPlan, or at MeisterPlan, we've, besides our software that we have also developed what we call a lean PPM framework. And that's basically a lightweight PPM process. And the first phase of that PPM, or that portfolio management process, is the collect phase. So that is the collecting of new initiatives. So that's what we're going to focus on primarily today. So if you take a look, so this is our main dashboard in MeisterPlan. You can see the Gantt chart. We'll come back to this later in the demo, but we're going to go over here. You can see different views of MeisterPlan that are available. Today, we're going to focus on our newest view, which is called the board view. And as you can see here, I've already got it set up for the project idea phase board. And the very first step in the project intake process here in MeisterPlan is to add the project. And you can do that directly in the board view. So you can click add project. And of course, you want to add the project name. And there's not a whole lot of information you need to add when it's a brand new idea, but if you have a rough estimate of when the project will start, you can add that here. Otherwise, you can just use the default for now. You can see that the project idea phase has been pre-filled with new ideas, so that's what we need. And the add more project details has been checked. So we'll go ahead and click add. And this is where you can add in more project details. For now, since this is a brand new idea, we're just going to go to the, excuse me, not status, wrong place. We're going to go to the stage gate and click idea. So that way it matches the project idea phase as well. So the stage gate and the project idea phase match. So then we'll go back to the project idea board. And so we can see our new ideas on the board. So the next step is brainstorming. So we'll move it to that column. Oh, before that, sorry, I forgot to mention this. When you add the new project idea, make sure that it is dragged below the cutoff line. And what that represents is the idea will represent a project in your portfolio, but it won't be part of your active portfolio. So that way you keep it separate from your ongoing and current projects. So then when we move to the brainstorming step, this is, as the name implies, this is where the brainstorming happens. So you'll brainstorm the idea with your colleagues, you'll start to develop your plan and just build it out. So the next area is where you're going to get expert input. And this could be internally going to subject matter experts in your own company. It may also be reaching out to external experts. And that may include customers. For instance, here at MeisterPlan, when we're developing a new feature or making a change within our app, we will reach out to our customers and make sure that the things that we're adding or the things that we're changing, that it really fits their needs. So that would be part of this area of the idea phase, making sure that we're getting that input from the right stakeholders. So at that point, the idea is gaining some ground, and in the lean PPM process, this is where what we call the proposal coaching happens. So the person who has come up with the idea, we usually call that the project initiator. He will meet with the coach, typically the portfolio coordinator, and they'll help build out the plan and make sure that it has all the information that you need. And you will use that information in the definition portion. So that's where you're going to go in and really fill in the project details about the project. So in this case, we're going to keep it simple for today, and we're going to concentrate on the details that are really relevant to the project score. And what I mean by project score is that MeisterPlan, you can set up custom criteria based on your strategy and give it a rating in MeisterPlan. And then it will automatically create a score for each project. So if we choose the different elements that are relevant, or the details that are relevant to that project, or to the project score, that will create the project score for that project. So we'll go back to the the idea phase board. And at this point, so long as in this step or previous steps, the idea hasn't been rejected, then it will now be ready to be evaluated. So we'll move it to the ready for review stage. And at that point, oops, I hit the wrong project, sorry about that. At that point, we'll go in and we'll change the stage gate to seeking review. And this is when basically the project idea goes from idea to a new initiative to be evaluated. So at that point, we'll move to the stage gate board. And we can see that project is sitting here in seeking review on the stage gate. And first, I'll show you how you can configure cards, the project cards, to show different information. So in this case, we're going to be really evaluating the initiatives against other new initiatives, as well as against the current work that's happening. So we're going to take project score as well as strategy fit and add that to the card. And we're also going to choose the color scheme strategy fit to match that. So as we change that, you can see that information pops up on the card. So basically, this will allow you to determine whether or not or how high of a priority a project is. So during the seeking review in Lean PPM, this is typically when things shift from the first phase of the portfolio management process, which is collect, to the second phase, which is decide. So the first step of that is having what we call a pipeline review committee. So what they do is they look at all new initiatives that are being proposed. They do a quality check on them, make sure that they have all of the details that they need in order to move on to the decision-making board, who will decide whether or not to proceed with the project. So then if we move then the project's ready to be moved to seeking approval. So at that point, we can see that, again, we can use the project score and the strategy fit information to really evaluate and take a look at the priority of the projects and take a look at them against the other approved projects and the active projects. Because as Achim mentioned, this last year with the pandemic and so many disruptions that happened, we saw more than usual that sometimes you really had to compare new initiatives against current work and really decide what makes the most sense, and do we need to adapt our plans and really take on a new project rather than the current work that we're doing. So that's one of the great things about the board view. You have that transparency where you can see the initiatives as well as the active projects. So at this point, the portfolio board or decision-making body will decide whether or not to reject a project or approve it. So since this seems to be, the new project idea seems to be really a high priority, it would likely be approved. So at this point, it is an approved project and it will become active. You want to make sure, again, that this time you move the project above the cutoff line, because now you want it to be a part of your active portfolio. So now that you've prioritized based on your strategy, you still need to know the feasibility of your projects. You need to know, do we have the capacity, and when do we have the capacity to get this work done? So the great thing about MeisterPlan is that it's not just a tool for project intake, it's primarily a tool for project portfolio management and capacity planning. So at that point, we can switch back over to that main dashboard that we call the portfolio designer, and we can see our new project is sitting right here in our portfolio. And what we didn't do during the project intake process is we didn't add resource demand to our project. That may be something you would include during as you're evaluating initiatives, and that's perfectly okay to do that early in the process. For now, we're going to do that now. So we're going to go ahead and allocate a resource or find the right person to do this project. And we're going to say how much of his capacity or her capacity that we would need. And you can see that at this time frame that we've got this project in right now, there's a red line over the project. And that basically signifies that there's a resource conflict here. So we don't have enough capacity during this time frame to get the job done. And there's a lot of different ways in MeisterPlan that you can figure out ways to resolve those resource conflicts. I'm going to show you a super easy way. So it's simply taking the project and dragging it to another time and finding when you'd be able to accomplish that project. So in this case, in April, there are no resource conflicts. You'll be able to complete that project during that time frame without any conflicts. So basically, that's how you go from using the MeisterPlan's board view, going from a project idea to an approved project aligned to strategy, and then to one that is feasible, where you know that you'll have enough capacity for that project. So that's basically it for what we're showing for today with the project intake process.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for the demo, Caroline. And before we get started with the Q&As, I want to highlight quickly that all of the things that we have seen that Caroline showed us, like configuration, color schemes, the metadata, including the custom fields values and the project score, for example, is all customizable. So this really is designed to make sure that you can use a standard SaaS tool like MeisterPlan to make it fit to your needs of the business. And there are, of course, other views as well that can support this overall decision-making process. So today we looked at the portfolio designer and the Kanban board, but there are multiple more views, such as the roadmap view, the project list view, and also some integrated pivot reports that can support this overall project portfolio management experience. But yeah, enough of talking. Let's have a look at the questions.
Yeah, so we do have a couple of questions that came in. The first one is, what's the best way to communicate newly approved projects? Achim, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can start answering this one. So communication is pretty important in the context of the intake process, right? Because you not just gather new projects, you also make a decision at some point. So within MeisterPlan, as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple views that can support the communication. For instance, you can export the Kanban view. So there is an option to click on export as PNG, and you could make this as a part of like a monthly communication, for example. Like you have a monthly board meeting, and in this board meeting, you make a decision going forward. So you could take a screenshot and communicate the decision on which projects got approved. At the same time, there's also a roadmap view in MeisterPlan that shows you the projects more like in a Gantt view rather than in a Kanban board view, similar to what we just saw in the portfolio designer when Caroline dragged and dropped the projects. These views are also customizable, so you can apply different grouping, for example, by business unit, by strategic objective, by health status, by basically any custom field you include in MeisterPlan. And on top of that, there is also a reporting API available. So it's very common to also plug in an external BI tool, for example, Power BI, Tableau, but anything else, it's a really universal interface we have in place there. Even Excel. With the newest Excel versions, you can directly establish an API connection and feed data in an Excel file, for example.
Great. Thanks for that answer, Achim. Another question has come in, and it is, what are the best ways to adapt to external factors that cause disruption to ensure that our projects stay aligned to the strategy?
Yeah, so typically you review and assess the current project strategic objectives that you align for scoring, and you adapt them in Meisterplan, right? Like a little bit what I talked about earlier. And reprioritizing a portfolio first means that there is some work to do, but also it means that you have priorities that have to be assigned to projects, new priorities, and they also impact eventually resources and capacities. So it's not just that you go into the Kanban view and say, well, we have just changed our strategic objectives, for example, and now our number 1 project is our number 4 project. That's the first step. But you then also have to make sure that these projects actually receive the proper resourcing, so that they receive the attention based on their priority. And this is a really big strength of Meisterplan, because you could go ahead and do this ranking in a board view style, where you just rank the projects on a vertical, and then go back into Meisterplan. And before you actually start assigning resources or assessing the available capacities of your teams, you would create a scenario before that. And with that, I mean that a scenario will help you to literally create a scenario going forward without touching the actual plan that is already in place. So you can really test and play around with different options, like a more aggressive scenario going forward, less aggressive scenario going forward, a very feasible scenario, and then decide on the scenario view what makes really sense for the business and what you can commit to. So this way you kind of play in two worlds without interfering with an existing plan.
Great, thank you. We did have another question that asks if there will be a recording of this webinar. I can answer that. Yes, we will record this webinar. We'll send out an email in the next couple of days, or with a link to the recording, possibly with a couple of other assets as well. And there will also be a link on our website where you can get access to the recording. So I think that's all the questions that we have right now, or if we happen to miss any questions, or if you come up with any questions later, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at sales@meisterplan.com. And we really thank you guys for attending our webinar. And as I said, you'll get availability to the recording of this webinar. And we also recommend you to take a look at our website. You can go to meisterplan.com and get access to a lot of best practices for portfolio management and capacity planning and resource management. There's also a lot of information, supplemental information about our product as well. So you can start your free trial there if you want to try Meisterplan out for yourself. The links are here. And you can also request a personal demo of Meisterplan if you'd like someone to go one-on-one and walk you through the tool. So yeah, again, thank you so much for attending the webinar, and reach out to us at sales@meisterplan.com if you have any additional questions. Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Goodbye.